Let's start small by planting a seed, shall we? A seed of doubt. That can be a good thing if it gets you started looking for the truth.
When I was taking a tour of that farm in Butler, Pennsylvania yesterday, I had local law enforcement officers, local electeds coming to me, whispering to me, there's more here to the story. We need to talk about what actually happened.
So, Congressman, the local elected law enforcement told you that we aren't hearing the whole story, and now you're telling us. But what did they say? Can you give us a hint? Do you want a hint? Here's a hint.
How many shots did the shooter fire?
Well, we know that he fired at least 8 because we recovered 8 cartridges on the roof.
And did the recovered shells, the cartridges, match the shooter's rifle?
Damn, that's a lot to take in. This congressman is suggesting, right to the face of the FBI director, that the spent bullet cartridges, the shells the FBI director claims were found on the roof next to Thomas Crooks, may not have been from Thomas Crooks's rifle at all, but may have been planted. The congressman is suggesting that Thomas Crooks did not fire at Trump or at anyone else, which means that he's innocent, and that he was murdered. Damn, in a congressional hearing. As hints go, that's very specific. And the FBI director responds, lamely,
My recollection is yes.
This congressman doesn't consider that an answer and demands to know.
And you conducted an analysis that confirms that?
Because I'm going to want to see that analysis, says the congressman. I also spoke to the local law enforcement, and they told me that you're a big liar.
Well, we work with ATF, but yes, so some of the work has been divided up. But
Let me translate that for you. What he said was,
And how many shells casings were recovered from the location of the counter snipers?
Dude, says the congressman, I'm not taking your word for any of this. If you want to tell me that the Secret Service counter snipers fired a shot, I want to see those shell casings too.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last part.
From the counter snipers location.
That I don't have the answer, at least here at my fingertips.
Yeah? I don't have an answer. What do you think I am, some kind of special agent or something? What do you think this is, a goddamn congressional hearing? I got no evidence to substantiate any of the things I'm saying. So you just keep thinking it's all lies, and good luck with that. See where that gets you, you elected bitch. I was appointed by Trump, so ooh.
Bottom line is that this is massive negligence to the point of me speculating on what was intentional and what wasn't. Wow.
How long did the counter sniper have Crooks in his sights before the shooter opened fire on President Trump?
I don't have that specific timeline.
I'm sorry, you don't know the communication that was taking place or how long he had him in his sights because you haven't spoke to him. We need to know why he waited for multiple rounds to be fired at President Trump before the threat was neutralized. We need to know if he was given an order to hold fire.
These guys, Republican and Democrat, all think one way and another that this was a staged event. But so, let's have a look at the evidence for ourselves, shall we? Starting from square one. But that's not square one. This is square one. It's taken me 50 years of devoted study to even feel like I'm getting a handle on what the deep state is. But I'll try to make this quick, with lots of footnotes at the end. If you're not familiar with the term, the deep state is the behind-the-scenes, deep power structure that largely runs whatever government is pretending to be in charge in Washington, Republican or Democrat. They don't control everything, and elections can make a difference, but the deep state can draw some red lines that no president dares cross. They killed JFK. And every president knows it. They have forced every president since to cover it up. This goes on today. For example, Jackie Kennedy's testimony before the Warren Commission is still classified. You can't read it, and the Kennedys can't complain about it. The 20 most reliable witnesses, all the eyewitnesses, say that the Secret Service stopped JFK's limousine in front of the grassy knoll at a dead stop for several seconds, waiting for the kill shot. The Secret Service was more directly involved in JFK's murder than the CIA. But the limousine in this video doesn't even slow down or pause, much less stop. Nice work, Deep State. The men who killed Kennedy worked for the richest family in the world that founded Israel, the family that has dominated the global economy for the last 200 years, the Rothschilds. Briefly, more than 3,000 architects and engineers have put their names on a petition asserting that jet fuel could not have brought down the buildings on 9/11. 3,000 architects and engineers. World-renowned scholars and scientists agree. Ask any commercial pilot or anyone connected with air defense whether a jetliner could evade air defenses for over an hour and then crash into the Pentagon. They will tell you angrily that 9/11 was an inside job, that the FAA and air defenses were on stand-down. And the trail of who was behind the 9/11 attacks leads right back to Israel and to Donald Trump. You need to be sure to watch the footnote at the end for a much more detailed picture, but let's see what we can do here in a couple of minutes. The FBI says it wasn't Osama who did 9/11. No one anymore even bothers to say it was Saddam. So who did 9/11? Professor Stephen Jones, a world-class physicist and the leading expert at analyzing samples to detect their chemical composition, found massive amounts of the explosive thermite in the dust at the World Trade Center. Positively. He also found the unexploded wrappers. So the attacks had to have been carried out by some powerful, well-connected group with access to massive explosives and to the buildings. 3 rabid Zionist billionaires controlled the World Trade Center at the time of the attacks: Larry Silverstein, Frank Lowy, and Louis Eisenberg. 2 vans, one full of explosives and the other with explosive residue, were stopped by police on 9/11, and the Israeli intelligence operatives inside the vans were arrested by the FBI because they had been seen dancing as the towers fell, and especially because there was explosive residue in their van, and because at least 2 of them were on the FBI's list of Israeli spies to keep an eye on. I think we can fairly infer that these are some of the guys who delivered the explosives that were massively placed in the buildings. Within a week, the Israeli company that owned the vans, Urban Moving Systems, simply evaporated, the owners reappearing sometime later in Israel. And the operatives from the vans were allowed to leave the country and flee back to Israel because who made that decision to let the prime suspects go? Well, as Assistant Attorney General at the Department of Justice, Michael Chertoff helped trace the 9/11 terrorist attacks to the al-Qaeda network, which is strictly bull, right? Al-Qaeda did not order the military to allow those planes to fly around for an hour. And Chertoff, without question, supervised the release of the most likely suspects ever arrested in the case. Chertoff is a citizen of Israel and a rabid Zionist.
Nations, democracies don't go to war easily, and they usually debate and argue before they do. Sometimes they have to be bombed into going to war.
This is Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak blaming Osama bin Laden an hour after the attacks.
Bin Laden sits in Afghanistan. There is a source of terror. Bin Laden, who is behind this very attack, when you and the whole world will realize.
Not to be outdone, Netanyahu pointed out that he predicted 6 years before that the World Trade Center would be brought down by terrorists.
So I wrote a book in 1995, and I said that if the West doesn't wake up to the suicidal nature of militant Islam, the next thing you'll see is the militant Islam is bringing down the World Trade Center.
Not to be outdone, Trump also predicted the attacks, and he predicted that Osama bin Laden would be the culprit.
I wrote in the book 2000, 2 years before the World Trade Center came down, I talked about Osama bin Laden, you better take him out. And now people are seeing that. They're saying, you know, Trump predicted Osama bin Laden, which actually is true.
But perhaps most critically and despicably and brutally, Trump took this true story of dancing Israeli operatives and he twisted it into a murderous lie about radical Muslims celebrating.
You are vindicated on the radical Muslims celebrating. I mean, what's going on here?
They were celebrating, and they were celebrating the fall of the World Trade Center. I think that's disgraceful.
Thousands and thousands of people were cheering as that building was coming down.
He is the first president to support Israel's theft of Jerusalem, and Israel's theft of the Golan Heights, and Israel's theft of the West Bank. He openly roots for the success of the genocide and Israel's theft of Gaza.
We have to let Israel complete their war on terror. It's a horrible thing, but they have to do it, and they have to do it fast.
His son-in-law, Jared, calls the genocide a little trouble.
It's a little bit of an unfortunate situation there.
And says the Palestinians should just all leave.
For whatever reason, here in Gaza, there's refugees from the fighting. And it's just, it's unfortunate that nobody's taking the refugees.
But also there are real fears. Once Gazans leave Gaza, Netanyahu's never going to let them back in.
Maybe, but I'm not sure there's much left of Gaza at this point. So in Gaza's waterfront property, it could be very valuable.
The Rothschilds, the founders of Israel, are the deep state. They are the reason that Israel seems to be able to control Britain and the U.S. This little tail somehow wags these too much bigger dogs. The Rothschilds are big oil, big banking, big pharma, big boom, and the global media lying to us about it all. They are AIPAC, and Israel is their flagship. And they own Donald Trump more completely than they have ever owned any president, and they want him back in the White House. Square 2 takes us in for a very close look at Thomas Crooks. Thomas graduated from high school in 2022 with an A-plus grade point average, 4.047, taking honors classes. Seriously? Did you know that? I didn't. No teacher and none of his friends had a bad word to say about him. Then he went to community college and graduated last May with a degree in engineering science in 2 years while working as a caregiver in a nursing home. I have always regarded those who work and go to school as the salt of the earth, the epitome of human achievement, the best that humanity has to offer. And at the same time, he worked as a caregiver, serving meals to the elderly and washing their dishes. Really admirable, important, necessary, challenging work for $16 an hour because, you know, it's admirable, important, necessary, and challenging, so it pays crap. Thomas's lifelong friend and a member of the rifle club at their high school says Thomas was a terrible shot. They liked him, but they threw him off the team. He was that bad. Now, I have a couple of questions for you. You know what this is. Did you ever try to shoot a pumpkin from 130 yards without a scope? This football field is 100 yards, and this guy is less than 100 yards away. Crooks was 130 yards, 100 feet farther away from Trump than this. But go rent a rifle and try it. Get a pumpkin, back off 130 yards, and have at it. Without a scope, you better bring 1,000 bullets and lunch, because you're going to be there a long time, and you'll still go home with a healthy pumpkin. Second question, did you know Thomas Crooks's rifle had no scope? You didn't? Well, look it up, but you won't be able to find the answer. You can't find a picture, not one, of his rifle. And why is that, do you suppose? That's because the rifle attributed to him had no scope. This picture is extracted from a police body cam video shot on the roof. Poor Thomas Crooks is in the bottom of this picture. There is positively no scope on this rifle. By the way, I went looking on the web for a rifle that looked like this one. Virtually all the AR-15s on the web looked like this one, not very similar. I found these two, the two closest matches I could find, and they are both dummies, made of rubber, used by the military for practicing real marching, but with a fake gun. Try looking yourself, and, as we move on, remember the congressman. Let's lay out the situation a little bit. This is a composite of a photo I made of the building Thomas Crooks was killed on, just to give you an idea of the slope of the roof. And this is a video someone made of the roof where Crooks was killed. You can see some of the remains of his blood as the camera moves to the top. And here, at the top, please notice this peak, this cap on the top of the roof. We are told it is about 5 inches. This is another composite, made from this authentic picture. The point is, if you are a sniper, keeping your head down because you don't want to be seen by the counter-snipers protecting Trump, nevertheless, to get a shot off, you have to raise your head and shoulders up over this roof cap if you want to point your rifle down at the rally on the other side. The director of the Secret Service explained this to the congressman.
There is a 5-inch rise on the middle of that roof. The assailant would have had to present his bore over that to get his shot off.
Now, I put Thomas Crooks holding a weapon in place of the Secret Service agent in this photo just to make this point. If Thomas Crooks had poked his weapon over the top of the roof, he would have presented a huge target to the Secret Service counter-snipers on top of the barn behind Trump. These men had weapons capable of hitting targets 1,000 yards away. This rooftop is about 1/10 of that. Crooks would have presented a target 10 times larger than what the counter-snipers were used to shooting at. These officers you're looking at now had heard over their radios that there was a possible sniper on the roof, and we see them here looking for him on that roof. These officers are responding to the same radio report, and we see them here looking for a possible sniper on that roof. And if Thomas Crooks had presented his bore over the peak of this roof, at least 8 police officers would have begun firing at him, but they didn't shoot him because he wasn't there. As this video shows, you hear Trump speaking just before the shots are fired.
If you want to really see something that said, take a look what happened.
And the camera swings wildly left and right. Again.
Take a look what happened.
And now, let's slow it down. And zoom in. This is the roof line where Crooks supposedly was, not getting shot at by anybody. And now let's zoom in a little more. As other videos show, Crooks just wasn't there because he was somewhere else.
There he is.
You can tell from Trump's speech in this video that Crooks climbed the roof over 5 minutes before the shooting.
Because we have millions and millions.
Crooks is at the very bottom of the roof, of course. In 5 minutes, he had time if he wanted to, if he decided to. But this is a video of the entire 16 seconds during which shots were fired, and Crooks still seems to be closer to the bottom than to the top edge of the roof. You be the judge. It's not a critical point. The first critical issue is that at the very instant that the first shots were fired, Crooks clearly had not raised himself up as he would have had to fire over the 5-inch cap on the top of the roof. In fact, at the very moment the shots are fired, he's lying as flat as possible. The second critical point is the angle of whatever Crooks is holding here. Whatever it is he's holding, a stick, a dummy rifle, or a real rifle, it follows the slant of the roof so that it's pointed up into the sky. And if he'd had a weapon, and if he'd fired a shot, the bullet would have flown 100 feet over the heads of everyone at the rally. So,
I had local law enforcement officers, local electeds, coming to me, whispering to me, there's more here to the story.
But now we have some real knowledge, I think. We've got a grip on square one, and we own square two, and especially square three. And now we're ready to apply what we've learned to some of these key questions that are flying around.
How long did the counter sniper have Crooks in his sights before the shooter opened fire on President Trump?
Man, that was my question. Was my question. And this one.
We need to know why he waited for multiple rounds to be fired at President Trump before the threat was neutralized. We need to know if he was given an order to hold fire.
But now I realize that the counter snipers never opened fire because, like the rest of the cops who were all studying that rooftop, they never saw Crooks because he wasn't there. And so, if not this guy, who fired the shots? If we bring in the information in this picture of the location of Thomas Crooks's body when the killers got done with it, we can locate Crooks at the time of the shooting here, more or less. None of the cops down here or over here or here or here could see Thomas Crooks because he was hidden behind the crest of the roof on the downward slope of that roof. So the shot that killed Thomas Crooks had to have come from the far side of the roof. There's a perimeter fence here. The Secret Service says, and no one disputes them, that they had no one on the far side, on the north side of this fence. So who was doing all that shooting? When I saw this article, I felt that our boy Thomas Crooks had to be a patsy, and I wondered then, the day after the shooting, where the real shooters could have been located. And when I saw this article, a couple of days after that, I couldn't believe it. 3 days in, we already had an admission that there were potential second shooters, just what I was looking for and just where I was looking for them, in one of the buildings near Thomas Crooks, in the perfect position to fire shots that would appear and sound as if they had been fired by Crooks. This congressman claims that the police snipers were in this window. The commander of the local snipers says they were in this window.
Beaver County Chief Detective Pat Young says 3 snipers were sitting about 3 feet back from windows inside the AGR building on the 2nd floor.
They were advised that they were to occupy the corner, the far right corner of the building, so on the complete opposite end of where Crooks was.
But it doesn't matter what anybody says, because these snipers had access to all the windows. So from any or all of these windows, a mysterious, unnamed, unaccountable sniper or snipers had the means and the opportunity to murder members of Donald Trump's audience and, not incidentally, Thomas Crooks. So, no doubt they could have done it, means and opportunity. But how do you prove that an unnamed mystery sniper had a motive? Well, how about showing that they are not good guys and that they are instead chock full of bad intentions? We're going to have to give that a shot. We saw this guy before, Republican Congressman and former sniper Corey Mills, giving his opinion that he felt that the security failures at the Butler rally were so egregious that they looked intentional.
That this is massive negligence to the point of me speculating on what was intentional and what wasn't. Wow.
And he makes the obvious basic point here that people working security want to make a show of force in order to discourage would-be assassins before they start shooting and killing people.
But when you have nothing that is actually showing force protection, you're encouraging this.
And that's the justification for these people to be in this full combat gear at what is essentially a day in the park. They want to be very high profile and intimidating. But maintaining a high profile is the opposite of what these guys were doing. Listen to this clip one more time.
Beaver County Chief Detective Pat Young says 3 snipers were sitting about 3 feet back from windows inside the AGR building on the 2nd floor.
This sniper says he was assigned to be in these windows, and darkly and inexplicably, he says that a Butler sniper leader, who doesn't seem to have a name, told him their mission was to look out of those windows and scan the area for threats, and they were instructed to remain covert. They set up their rifles on tripods so that the barrels were a foot or two inside the open windows to prevent them from being seen from outside. This crazy picture was taken and published by Republican Senator Chuck Grassley at this window. Look at that weapon. That is the actual weapon these snipers had set up in the window they were shooting from. And please notice that it has a black shade draped over it. That's not standard. You don't carry something like that around with you. They had to bring this black drape with them to the rally. They came prepared in advance to do some quiet, covert, strictly off the record killing. So how do you prove these guys had bad intentions? Well, this black drape over their sniper's gun, hidden back away from this window inside this room, looks to me like a slam dunk. Did they have bad intentions? Does murder count? And we're not done. The snipers would have had a commanding view of Crooks, no matter which of these windows they looked out from. This video is taken from this window. But from this window, they could easily have hit Crooks with a large rock, literally as he was climbing up practically in front of them. And this video was taken over 5 minutes before the shooting started. Let's look again, and this time, pay attention to the people shouting right outside this window.
Officer! Criminals! We have criminals! We have drug dealers! We have people that
right here! Flat on the roof! You went flat on the roof again!
Can we reasonably believe that the snipers inside this window didn't hear this shouting? They had 5 minutes to respond, and they didn't do anything? Although you know these people didn't stop yelling at the police to do something. But it turns out a number of the cops on the scene did respond, got on the radio, and called it in.
Someone's on the roof.
13 seconds later, another cop, who had positioned his car so that he could see this roof, got this radio message at 6:08 p.m. and 33 seconds. Exactly 3 minutes before the shooting started.
I have someone on the roof with white shorts.
And because he had responded and parked his car where he could see the roof, this cop was able to see some dude running on top of the roof.
See that dude running?
These cops responded to these radio messages seconds later and began looking at the roof line. With people hollering right outside their windows, our covert sniper friends in these windows didn't lift a finger to find Thomas Crooks or to apprehend him, although close to a dozen other officers did respond. The snipers in these windows had the means to fire all these shots covertly. Their view from these windows provided them the very singular opportunity to shoot Thomas Crooks and to do it unobserved. No other officers were in a position to fire a fatal shot at Crooks. And the fact that they showed up, equipped for covert killing, and inexplicably took up these covert positions, and completely ignored the alarm sounded right outside their windows, shows that they had motive, premeditation to commit murder in order to carry out this charade of Donald Trump's false heroism. Who would do such a thing? Let's get right to this. Knives out. Suppose you were the Mossad supervisor in charge of this performance. One of your biggest problems is that Trump is such a whining baby that he's not going to want to lie on the floor of a stage with a bunch of burly Secret Service guys on top of him for more than a few seconds. So after just 47 seconds, you proclaim that the shooter is down and then let Trump move on to his photo op.
For 9 full seconds, Donald Trump was allowed to stand back up during an active shooter situation. How would they have known if there were more shooters or not? Nobody knew. That there could have been 5 shooters for all they knew. Yet they allowed him to stand up in the middle of that, crisis and pose for a photo.
Lots of things don't make sense about this story, but we're going to focus for a minute on these 47 seconds between the first shot and the announcement that the shooter is down, and these 4 words. You will recall that the Secret Service says that they had no one north of this fence line, so they had no one in a position to either shoot Thomas Crooks or even to observe that he'd been shot. So where did this information come from that the shooter is down? Who knew? Besides the guy who shot him. Oh, and and the guy who wrote the script, telling the players what to say and when, but we can go deeper than that. This SWAT team member was among the first to verify that Crooks was dead.
And as you're scrambling onto that roof, you don't know for sure whether he's dead or alive, or whether you'll encounter fire.
At that point, no.
And what time was that? This is body cam footage of the SWAT team members first going up onto the roof, and this has a timestamp. Did you catch that? Someone shouted. I think we can very safely state that the officer shouting this does not know, but is in the process of ascertaining, that Crooks is dead. He's the first guy on the roof. And look at the timestamp, 18:15:58. That's 6:15 p.m. and 58 seconds. Trump was shot at 6:11 p.m. and 33 seconds. 47 seconds later, at 6:12 p.m. and 20 seconds, Trump's personal Secret Service detail began declaring the shooter is down and all clear at 6:12 p.m. and 20 seconds. But the SWAT team members, the first police on the roof, were still unsure that Crooks was dead at 6:15 and 58 seconds. These guys were declaring the shooter is down 3 minutes and 38 seconds before the first officers on the roof were certain that Crooks was dead. And how does that work exactly? You answer that question for yourself. Perhaps Trump's personal security detail was in direct communication with the shooters in these windows. Positively, these lines were written into the script. This 3.5-minute gap is part of the growing body of evidence that proves that this entire event was orchestrated. Ask yourself, if you can imagine yourself in the mind of this monster for 2 seconds, what was the key element in this black operation, this black op? The prime, overarching prerequisite is that you don't kill Donald Trump. As you'll see, that's not an obvious point. This is the guy who handed Israel far more than any president in history, and who was absolutely key to Israel's final extermination of Palestinian rights in Palestine. So he must be protected at all costs. Say the monsters. Experienced planners of black operations know that Murphy's Law is ironclad. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong. If you fire any bullets anywhere where they might hit Trump, Murphy's Law guarantees that a sniper will surely sneeze or hiccup or fart and cough and accidentally blow Trump's brains out. So the notion that there might be a plan that included pointing a gun at Trump and shooting off part of Trump's ear with a large bullet from 130 yards away, that would be completely out of the question. With that in mind, let's have a close look at the performance on the stage in Butler, Pennsylvania. Like a fake wrestling performance, there was so much movement, so many details that had to be carefully rehearsed and coordinated. It was a nicely done professional piece of work, but it's only as good as a fake can be, and that's not good enough to stand up to close scrutiny. First, they had to provide Trump with a chart so that he would have an excuse to turn and face in the direction of the supposed shooter, putting his ear in a plausible position to pretend to be shot. Now, if you touch a hot stove or step on a Lego, without thinking you react, and your reaction is instantaneous. Flinching is like that, isn't it? If someone moves to hit you, without thinking you react. It's unconscious. In fact, you can't hardly help it. And your reaction is instantaneous. When you get startled by a loud noise or shot in the ear, the reaction to the pain is supposed to be instantaneous. It's reflex, no? Now watch this. The instant Trump hears the sound of the first shot, he flinches. That flinch, that's real. That's a genuine response. And then a full half second goes by before he starts to reach for his ear. It's very subtle. I'll show you on my editing screen. This peak right here shows the sound of the rifle shot in the audio timeline, and I'm going to go back and forth between the instant before and the instant after the sound of the shot. That's 1/29th of a second. From here, you can see Trump flinch. Watch his shoulder go up and his head come down. It's subtle, but you can see it clearly enough. Trump heard the shot, and he flinched, though just a tiny bit. But now, look at the time counter here, and at Trump's wrist here, as we move in time to see him reach for his ear. It's 14 ticks, 14/29ths of a second, from where he flinches before he even starts to move his arm to his ear. That's not reflex. That's a conscious reaction. He is not reflexively grabbing his ear, reacting to the pain. He is reacting consciously to hearing the shot and doing what the script says he should do. And, as he no doubt rehearsed, he is reaching for his ear.
The lady doth protest too much, methinks.
If you're not familiar, that's a line from Hamlet, suggesting that if a lady denies something with too much emphasis, it suggests that she's guilty of whatever it is she's denying. The thing is, Trump is such a liar, and he's such a coward.
We're not doing it again.
And he's such a fraudster. And look at this photo. This Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer shows up for no particular reason at this relatively tiny rally, at this out-of-the-way backroad village, and knowing right where to go, he runs to be in position to take this photo. And look at this flag. Who in the audience has a view like this of this flag? No one besides the photographer kneeling at the bottom of the stairs, looking nearly straight up. This is the view everyone else had of that flag. But in this picture, it makes a Pulitzer Prize-winning perfect backdrop.
For 9 full seconds, Donald Trump was allowed to stand back up during an active shooter situation.
So millions of people figured immediately that the whole thing was a setup. It was just too obvious. And so, to counter that, this same Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer discovered this magic picture of this magic bullet, proving that there was a shot by showing us a picture of the bullet going 2,300 feet per second. It's so idiotic it must have been Trump's idea. Reading this article, it feels like the Times reporter was embarrassed to be defending this ridiculous story. He certainly didn't try very hard. He doesn't try to find an example of anyone else who ever shot a picture of a bullet or talk to an expert on that subject. Instead, he finds an FBI agent with no background in photo analysis, and he quotes him saying, well, it might have been a bullet, just not the one that hit Trump in the ear, and that the chances are 1 in a million and nearly impossible of capturing a shot like that. Problem is, when you throw into the mix that the greatest liar of modern history has called this photographer a genius for coming up with this photo, it's a very safe bet that this is not a 1 in a million miracle, but the kind of lie that Trump tells 100 times a day for the last 78 years. I have to say that the members of Trump's team responsible for planning and executing the fake blood did a really fine job, Academy Award quality, or at least WWE award-winning performance. I have to admire the attention to fine details. For example, here we find a guy who has heard the muzzle blast from 2 shots at his head. He supposedly had part of his ear blown off. He doesn't say ouch, but he does pause to look at his hand before he ducks his head and the rest of his body out of the way of the bullets. Who does that? Nobody? So why did they write this into the script? Why was he trained and rehearsed to look at his hand first before ducking? Surprise! Enter the purveyor of the magic bullet photo again. He also took this picture with what, to me, looks like a little smear of blood photoshopped in. Trump had to look at his hand so that we could get this shot. I'm just saying, why else? Award-winning attention to detail. At the Republican convention, Trump painfully read the long script they wrote for him about his assassination, and he says,
when I heard a loud whizzing sound and felt something hit me really, really hard on my right ear, I said to myself, wow, what was that? It can only be a bullet. And moved my right hand to my ear, brought it down. My hand was covered with blood. Just absolutely blood all over the place.
This is the clearest, sharpest version I could find of Trump's hand as he brought it down from his ear. It may be overstating to say that it shows no blood. Certainly, it shows that Trump was reading a lie when he read,
My hand was covered with blood.
So Trump lies? That's news? Well, no, except that this lie involves the murder of 2 registered Republicans. But my point is, because they knew millions of people were questioning the story, they gave us this ridiculous photo of a bullet in mid-flight, and then, even later, this same New York Times reporter found this improbable still photo of blood, where video shows next to none, if any. They could have made me shut up for a minute anyway if they'd showed us just one picture of Trump's ear with a discernible hole in it. But all those people with all those phones and not one picture of a wound. No report from a hospital emergency room because, gunshot wounds, you just put a Band-Aid on it. Unless it's a big wound, of course. And then you put a big Band-Aid on it. We all know Trump doesn't care about the truth, of course, but he's so lazy about the lies he tells. A mere 13 days after the shooting, Trump attended what was called the Believers Summit in Palm Beach. Google it. Good grief. He wants us to know.
I'm a fast healer.
Unlike all you losers out there with cartilage in your ear that would take you losers 4 to 8 months to heal, and then you losers would have scars. 2 weeks after his gunshot wound, Trump showed off that he didn't have so much as a scratch. And no matter how obvious this lie is, the media, who supposedly hates his guts, can't say anything because that would be accusing him of murder. And that's a red line you better not cross. Trump is not a brave man, though he loves pretending that he is. This photo op eagle scares the piss out of him. One time, and he's done.
We're not doing it again.
Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal both gave detailed accounts of Trump having sex with them. Both said that Keith Schiller, Trump's bodyguard, was always on hand to protect his boss in case any of these women tried to pull any funny stuff. But in this video, he's laying here. His security has completely failed him, allowing someone to get off 8 shots. He supposedly has a hole in his ear. He's bleeding profusely.
Just absolutely blood all over the place.
He had all these big guys on top of him a second ago. And as he freaked out, having just missed death by a fraction of an inch, he would have been rightly terrified. A normal person would be vastly shaken. And in the face of all this, he stands up and he's worried not about getting out alive, he's worried about his shoe.
Let me get my shoes. Let me get my shoes.
I got you, sir. I got you, sir.
Let me get my shoes, sir.
Hold that in your head. It's bloody.
So we gotta move to the bus. Let me get my shoes.
And then he goes all WWE, grandstanding, shaking his fist, and with blood streaming down his face, the smell of gun smoke in the air, dead and wounded all around, his personal Secret Service detail, this highly trained team of personal bodyguards, let him grandstand and carry on like there was no threat whatsoever. They could not possibly have known that there were not several shooters, except that they were in on it. But now watch this. He's giving them directions. As rehearsed, he's approaching the stairs. Trump sees the genius photographer in place, and Trump gives his security detail the sign to stop, which they obey. He does his little prearranged fist pump. Click, click, click goes the photographer. You can see Trump makes eye contact with the photographer. Got it. And then Trump gives the sign to go, and then they go. But again, this wasn't just crass and cowardly pretense, a disgusting lie perpetrated against the American people. It was murder.
Saturday, the devil came to Pennsylvania holding a rifle, but an American lion got back up on his feet and he roared. Oh yeah, he roared.
Makes me physically ill I have no doubt that Corey Comparatore died that day. His murder was no hoax, in my opinion, and others were very severely wounded, I'm quite sure. I believe that bullets were flying, so by this point in your education, you're supposed to be asking advanced questions like, if Trump is so precious to the deep state, and if he's such a coward, how did they do this? How did they shoot all these bullets around him without risking accidentally hitting him? The first key is to ask the question. The next key is to find a good, large photo of the whole scene. Then you have to figure out where the real shooters were, and then draw a line to Trump. And what do we see? Ta-da! Somebody with lots of experience and highly developed skills in this black ops stuff brilliantly parked this giant red tractor right in the way of any bullet that might have been thinking of hitting Trump. The killer snipers easily hit the members of the audience, but they couldn't hit Trump by accident or on purpose. Nice work, you murderers. There are a few questions that deserve more detailed answers, so let's look at some of them now. The primary question that we've left completely untouched is how the perpetrators got a sweet kid like Thomas Crooks up onto that roof. For me, as you're about to see, this question is not new. In 2022, a sweet 18-year-old young man, Salvador Ramos, walked into his local elementary school and murdered 18 little kids and 2 teachers. Salvador had gone to that school, where his teachers loved him. He had relatives who were there that day. The father of the principal lived right across the street. This guy was Salvador's grandfather's best friend. All his neighbors and former teachers liked him. None had a bad word to say about him. The head of the state police, however, came in and immediately started lying his ass off about how Salvador got through the 2 doors that were supposed to be kept locked at all times. Every door on that campus was supposed to be locked. I made this video at the time and did a very deep dive into this question of whether people can be programmed mentally to commit murder and how. You can scarcely imagine how delicate and easily manipulated the human mind is. You can find talented hypnotists on the internet and performing at clubs. They can get people to do things under hypnosis that the subjects don't remember and that they would never do normally. But these guys are just messing around. These guys are not. For 70 years at a dozen sites, the CIA has studied how to capture ordinary citizens and turn them into programmed assassins using mind control techniques. These programmed assassins are popularly known as Manchurian candidates. Famously, John Lennon's and Robert Kennedy's killers, the young men who shot George Wallace and Ronald Reagan, all appear to have been victims of mind control. Young men who had no motive, didn't hate the men they shot, and don't remember committing their crimes. I don't know Jesse Ventura, and I can't vouch for him, but I was startled by the excellence of a program he sponsored on mind control and Manchurian candidates.
For you and for...
The program begins by introducing us to psychiatrist Colin Ross, who has written several books about identity disorder and CIA mind control. His definition of a Manchurian candidate hit me like a ton of bricks.
Manchurian candidate.
Basically an artificially created multiple personality, where there's another identity inside, which is given the mission parameters, carries out the mission. The out front person has no memory for the mission, so it keeps the information secure.
That may be a little hard to understand, but then Dr. Ross shows us the actual CIA documents which make it very clear. In 1953, the CIA was working on creating a Jekyll-Hyde personality. Jekyll and Hyde refers to a manufactured split personality. Jekyll is the good, original personality, and Hyde is a manufactured evil one. And this CIA report makes perfectly clear that they were trying to create a second, evil personality within their involuntary subjects. Creating this evil personality is step 1. Dr. Ross then explains the second step, which is completely applicable to Salvador.
To get somebody who's stable, who's operational, you get control of their life space for weeks, months, or a couple of years.
and you start doing a lot of hypnosis, a bunch of different drugs.
Or, in order to stabilize this second evil personality, they have their victim live out this alternate personality, driving around, for example, with an evil guide performing evil, antisocial, hateful acts, learning to live inside this personality, to develop the evil personality more fully, more permanently, and more reliably. The third step is to program a trigger that will turn this new evil personality into a killer. This document shows that the next year, 1954, the CIA started to use hypnosis to program such a trigger into one of their secretaries. Before she was hypnotized, the secretary feared any type of gun, but using hypnosis, she was programmed so that when her coworker failed to awaken from a hypnosis-induced sleep, the secretary would be triggered to become so angry that she would grab a gun and kill her coworker. And so, when she couldn't wake her coworker up, the secretary in fact was triggered and grabbed an unloaded gun and fired it at her coworker. She later remembered nothing about the incident. 1954. So, for the ruling elites, programming killers is an old-time favorite. In Jesse Ventura's program, they recruited a volunteer who, after a couple of minutes working with a hypnotist, reached the point where he could be put into a trance in an instant. While under the hypnotic trance, the volunteer was programmed with the trigger Rosebud. When he hears that word, he is to start limping. And as the volunteer is walking with Jesse, he gets a call delivering the trigger, Rosebud, and he immediately starts limping, completely unaware of any of it.
What are you limping for? Why are you limping?
I'm not limping.
Really?
Yeah. I'm walking fine.
When the volunteer watched this video of his own behavior, he was shocked. He remembered none of it. Jesse also interviewed General Albert Stubblebine III, former head of U.S. Army intelligence from 1980 to 1983.
General, this Manchurian candidate situation, knowing how government operates, wouldn't you have to believe it's going on? That's somewhere within that vast.
I'm sure.
That it's going on somewhere.
I have no doubt.
Sirhan Sirhan was convicted in the 1968 murder of Robert Kennedy. Because it was Robert Kennedy, a lot of highly reputable people paid attention to this case, including Harvard professor of psychiatry Daniel P. Brown.
So I've seen him for over 100, 150 hours over the last 11 years and tried to find out what we could about what happened.
Brown filed an affidavit with the court stating that Sirhan did not act under his own volition and knowledge at the time of the assassination and is not responsible. Sirhan was, Brown said, a true Manchurian candidate, hypno-programmed into carrying out a violent political act without knowing it. And, like Salvador Ramos and Thomas Crooks, Sirhan was mild-mannered, had no criminal history, and no motive whatsoever. He liked Robert Kennedy. Someone used both drugs and hypnosis to make Sirhan totally compliant. Did someone use drugs and hypnosis to make Salvador Ramos and Thomas Crooks totally compliant? This senator seems to get it. She wants to know if there's a toxicology report showing whether Salvador was on drugs at the time.
Mention a toxicology report. Do we have a toxicology report?
No, autopsies have not been, we don't have the report, the final report yet.
So at this point, no toxicology report on the shooter?
That's correct.
In the most horrific crime in all Texas history, no autopsy. Salvador Ramos's toxicology report might have revealed what exact drugs are used to make Manchurian candidates. Thomas Crooks's toxicology report, likewise. The most serious attempt on the life of a presidential candidate in 55 years, and no autopsy besides this outrage. Not only was there no toxicology report, there's nothing about the location of entrance and exit wounds, information that would have told us where Thomas Crooks's murderer was located. So, I don't know, and I can't prove it, but I can point out that Thomas was unaccountably missing before the shooting, And I can point out that this is consistent with the notion that the perpetrators had him and were working on him. But I can ask why there's no toxicology report, damn it, in a case that screams for one. And I can point to Sirhan and to Salvador Ramos to say that when a mild-mannered person suddenly turns into a wild killer for no reason, we have reason to suspect that they've been programmed. I thought the New York Times hates Trump. So then, why did they celebrate these 3 pieces of poisonous garbage, passing them off as news, helping support the lie of Trump's fake heroism, right? If they're so liberal, such a shining example of the free press, why do they go along with the 9/11 lie about terrorists with box cutters and the lie about JFK being killed by a lone nut? Because they are deep fake organs, undercover tools of the deep state. Their job isn't just to lie. In order to trick people, to con them into believing the important lies, they have to appear to be telling the truth at least some of the time. They print this stuff because the men who control the New York Times also control. They own Donald Trump. He is theirs, heart and soul. Trump's primary appeal to voters is his claim that these media hate him because they are fake news.
The fake news media, which is back there. It's called fake news. We are fighting the fake news. It's fake, phony, fake.
And he tells the truth, don't you know, a notorious truth teller.
Mr. Trump, one of the things people love about you is you speak your mind and you don't use a politician's filter.
I think the big problem this country has is being politically correct. I've been challenged by so many people, and I don't frankly have time for total political correctness. And to be honest with you, this country doesn't have time either.
That's his shtick, his primary con. He's not like the rest. That's why he released all the JFK documents like he promised he would, and all the 9/11 documents like he also promised he would. He's a fake, but the New York Times' hatred of him is also fake. They pretend to hate him for the same reason that Dick Cheney pretends to hate him, because it helps Trump maintain this fraud that somehow, despite his support for trillions in tax cuts for billionaires, despite his support for bloated defense budgets of epic proportions, despite his support for letting the pharmaceutical companies and financial oligarchs run rampant, despite his over-the-top support for the genocide being committed by Israel, he is not the deep state's favorite candidate? That's a lie. I have to include one of the biggest lies in the Trump pantheon, that Trump and Putin just love each other. Let's learn together the fact that Obama had opposed sending weapons to Ukraine, but Trump sent them, weapons that have killed at least 20,000 Russians. Trump started what is essentially a war on Putin by sending the first weapons. So, Donald Trump is a craven slave to Israeli interests. He gives them everything they've ever wanted, jeopardizing U.S. political standing in the Middle East and South Asia, where 1 billion Muslims dominate. And in return, Israel gives nothing back to the U.S. But how does that work? What is the hold that Israel and the deep state have over Trump? I'm open to the suggestion that it doesn't much matter. His craven, abject submission to Israel is plain fact. It's there in your face. Does it matter how that came to be? But it's not a stupid or irrelevant question, so let's take a minute. Another giant whopper in Trump's pantheon of lies about himself is that he's a successful businessman.
I'm rich. Yes, I've been a very successful guy, very successful businessman. I made my money as a successful private business person.
The truth is that Trump may be the most disastrous businessman in all of history. No fooling. Everything he touches turns to crap, losing many billions for the poor trusting fools who invested in him. In 1990, He made the disastrous decision to borrow billions at super high interest rates so that he could own 3 giant casinos in Atlantic City, so that they could all compete with each other? That's just moronic. And sure enough, within months,
Trump owed $4 billion to his debtors, including that $1 billion for which he was personally responsible.
did you get that? His ass was the sole collateral for $1 billion of this $4 billion debt. He was going to lose everything.
It was no longer an issue of a bank and a piece of real estate. It was a bank and Donald Trump's actual survival.
The Rothschilds, the founders of Israel, the principal leaders of the deep state, bailed him out. They bought him. Okay? We're done, right? No, we're just getting started. In 1992, the Rothschilds continued to keep his head just above water as he led 3 more businesses into bankruptcy: the Trump Castle Hotel and Casino, the Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino, and Trump Shuttle, his very short-lived airline. The Rothschilds helped him regroup and form Trump Hotels and Casino Resorts. And they bailed him out 3 more times with bankruptcies in 2004, 2009, and 2014. This facade he puts on,
I'm rich. Yes, I've been a very successful guy, very successful businessman.
is a complete fraud. But the Rothschilds have created this illusion, and a very successful fraud it has been for them. But you will have noticed that when an octopus grabs its prey, it isn't satisfied using just one arm, so maybe there's more. Jeffrey Epstein, before he was murdered in his prison cell by the deep state, was a Mossad operative whose job was to lure powerful men to commit sex crimes with underage girls at his parties so that the Mossad could then blackmail them into serving Israel. Epstein led a billionaire lifestyle, mysteriously and unaccountably, since he didn't have any real money. He had a large, luxurious plane and a friggin' island and fancy houses to which he invited political targets of the Mossad, people they would like to get compromising photos of. We don't have any photos of those parties. All we have is these pictures of this quote-unquote party that Epstein seems to have thrown for Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Trump greets Epstein at the door, but strangely, Epstein acts like he doesn't know Trump for some reason. In any case, here, again, Epstein is being the quiet, reserved one. Maybe it's the camera? Or maybe it's because he's laying a trap for Trump, playing it cool to put Trump off his guard, so he can get pictures of him later having sex with these no doubt underage girls. We know Trump likes to talk dirty to other men, bragging about grabbing women's private parts without permission. But we also know that Epstein is a major sex criminal, trafficking underage girls, who is famous for being a womanizer, especially, like me, says Trump, of underage girls. So I have to wonder, what disgusting thing could Trump have said to this low-down monster to get this over-the-top reaction? It had to be something absolutely monstrous. But let's take the time to notice, please. There are no men present. What kind of a party is that? Where a room full of pretty young girls are dancing by themselves, while these filthy, disgusting men are leering at them? Finally, the Donald wades out into the middle of these women and starts aggressively making moves on one of them. But note, again, that he's completely surrounded by women. This isn't a party. It's not even an orgy. It's an exhibition of sex workers. These men are predators, expecting that paid-for services will be rendered by these apparently underage, very young women. These are the pictures we have. Imagine, if you will, what the Mossad has. Are you imagining? Because the octopus isn't satisfied with having 2 tentacles wrapped around its prey. Many internet commentators have grimaced publicly at these photos. What are we supposed to think? Father and daughter posing suggestively on top of 2 parrots that are having sex. It's widely observed that Julia Joffe got fired for writing what everyone was thinking. She got fired and Trump got elected.
Your daughter. She's beautiful. Can I say this? A piece of ass.
Yeah, she's really something, and what a beauty, that one. If I weren't happily married, and, you know, her father.
My daughter, Ivanka.
Yeah.
She's 6 feet tall. She's got the best body. Weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her. You know.
Stop it! Oh, it's so weird. Stop
You know
it.
what? You are sick.
I know, isn't it terrible?
Yeah.
How
Well, you're
terrible.
known for saying
Is that
outrageous
terrible?
things,
Weird.
Mr.
Just like
Trump.
Who are you, Woody Allen?
What's the favorite thing you have in common with your father?
Either real estate or golf.
Donald, with your daughter?
Well, I was going to say sex, but I can't relate that.
Now, in my mind, Trump is staring at the flower arrangement on the table across from the bed, asking himself, is that a camera in there, hidden in those flowers? It seems that it was a camera. We got this picture. No doubt, Mossad has a copy of the tape, and Putin has the original. Okay, so Trump lied to us. Duh. He gave us this stuff about
we are going to drain the swamp in Washington, D.C.
And then he brought in the richest collection of greedy alligators and snakes in American history, as he would say. He gave us all this stuff about
I'm with you, the American people.
and then gave $1 trillion in tax cuts to his billionaire friends. He told
You're
us
going to have such great health care at a tiny fraction of the cost.
And then he did everything he could to subvert the only health care millions of people have. But politics is a lying contest. So how did Trump win? Is he some sort of lying genius?
What the hell is going on?
It turns out he's not a genius. He's a semi-housebroken trained baboon. Steve Bannon was the architect of Donald Trump's campaign. It turns out that 2 years before there was a candidate, Donald Trump, Steve Bannon created Cambridge Analytica. And Bannon and Cambridge came up with drain the swamp, build a wall, and deep state in order to trick idiots like me into supporting Trump because he was so independent, so he could cut taxes for billionaires. But Bannon says he stole the idea from the monsters who created Hitler. No foolin'. He told 2 of his closest friends on 2 different occasions in 2 different New Yorker magazine articles that Leni Riefenstahl, Hitler's chief campaign propagandist, was his hero and role model. Captain Karl Mayer was Hitler's boss, training him as a police operative immediately after World War I, before he sent him to organize the Nazi Party. Mayer is the principal source for all information about Hitler during this period, and he says that Hitler didn't hate Jews, but he gave speeches attacking Jews under orders from the German ruling elite. The plan was to mislead German workers into fighting poor Jews, while the elite made plans to start World War II and cut taxes for billionaires. Mayer says Hitler, like Trump, didn't write a single line of his book either, Mein Kampf. It should be less surprising, then, to learn that Cambridge Analytica's approach to develop a program that was carefully concocted to fit in with the wishful thinking of the majority, and then to find a candidate to support it, was stolen from the monsters who put Hitler in power. So when Steve Bannon told his closest friends and associates that he was a careful student of Hitler's rise and of his propaganda, he wasn't kidding. This is a state-of-the-art documentary with extensive footnotes giving detailed sources and evidence. This needs to be a 2-hour documentary at least, but let's see how many pins we can knock down and how much dust we can stir up in a couple of minutes. As you'll see in the next bit, the JFK assassination is my home court. I've been stomping those grounds for 50 years, And not for nothing, I can prove that George H.W. Bush was arrested that day as a shooter. His CIA office mate, E. Howard Hunt, was arrested behind the grassy knoll where the fatal shot was fired from. Both worked for Averell Harriman, the richest man in the United States, but Harriman was only a junior partner in 1963 to the financial giant Brown Brothers, which had been acquired by the Rothschilds in 1837, 197 years ago. Brown Brothers was perhaps the largest bank in the U.S. at the time, representing a huge portion of the entire wealth of the United States, and the Rothschilds acquired them. But they had swallowed a much bigger fish 12 years before when they took over the Bank of England. And for the last 197 years, they have been adding to this wealth and to their domination of the U.S. and world economies. The Rothschilds are the richest, most powerful, most evil banking empire in the history of the planet. They ran Auschwitz. They are big oil. They are big pharma. They are the international military-industrial complex. They profit from every weapon made in the U.S. or Europe or England. So they promote war, and of course, they murder peacemakers. Bad people. Their purchase of Donald Trump in 1990 was a minor acquisition. I consider, then, this estimate of the Rothschilds' domination to be conservative. It's stunning to me how all these pieces just fit so neatly together, and how each helps to explain the other. Crooks never reached the top of the roof. This explains why a straight-A student and sweet kid would be an assassin. He wasn't. And why the congressman was so rude to the FBI director, accusing him of being a liar. The director was lying.
We know that he fired at least 8 because we recovered 8 cartridges on the roof.
And why the Secret Service snipers allowed 8 shots to be fired. They couldn't see who was doing the shooting. Why these snipers hiding in this window never responded to the shouts of the crowd right outside their window that there was someone on the roof right in front of them. Why Trump's personal Secret Service detail allowed Trump to get up 3 minutes before anyone could have reported that the shooter had been eliminated. And why they allowed him to grandstand like this, and why the Secret Service wasn't worried about other shooters. Why Trump was more worried about his friggin' shoe than about being shot. We can now see, because we know to look for it, the choreography, Trump's close and careful control of his Secret Service team, and we can now recognize the product of careful rehearsal. We can now understand why these snipers were hiding rather than showing off and trying to be intimidating. We can now see the significance of that red tractor parked where it was. But do you see what piece is missing from this incredibly detailed plan? They did all this, including 2 murders, to make Trump look strong, right?
An American lion got back up on his feet and he roared!
Is there anything more that they could have done? One obvious thing. You build up your guy and you break down the other guy.
Did you see Trump last night? My guess he set a new record for the most lies told in a single debate.
If you're going to make a plan, including murder, to make Trump look strong, you also have to have a plan to make Biden look weak, no? Newsweek magazine observed, as I did, that Biden obviously looked like he had been drugged. He was fine before, and he was much better just hours afterwards. But at the debate, his own makeup people had made him up to look like he was on death's door. And how do you explain that? That wasn't an accident. Is it too much to suggest that Trump's nefarious team of black operatives would or could do such a thing as to drug Biden? Roger Ailes, director of Fox News for 20 years, didn't think it was too much.
Megyn Kelly's new book isn't even out yet, but it is already causing a firestorm, with insinuations that she might have been poisoned the night of the first Republican debate when she asked Donald Trump this edgy question.
You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals.
Megan writes in her book that en route to the debate, her driver insisted on getting her coffee, though she'd repeatedly declined his offer. Once it was in her hand, she drank it, and within 15 minutes, she was violently ill, vomiting so uncontrollably that it was unclear if she'd be able to go on and help moderate that evening.
And, she says, when she told Roger Ailes what had happened, he told her in no uncertain terms that Trump's operatives had poisoned her.
This is crazy. We're sitting here wondering if a candidate for president poisoned my coffee.
It's only crazy until it happens. And it happens.
But what does Roger Ailes know about Trump and his operatives? A lot. My first JFK video, Dark Legacy, was on Netflix and Prime for the last 10 years. Last year, I completed 50 years of committed research into the murder of JFK with my new documentary, Breakthrough. This is the trailer.
Execute the office of President of the United States.
The original Dark Legacy assembled a mountain of evidence connecting George Herbert Walker Bush to the murder of John Kennedy. It is indeed a mountain of evidence. There's so much, it's a stretch to get your mind around it all. But now there is so much new, clear, conclusive evidence. It really is a breakthrough. Bush was there in Dallas the night before. He was arrested as a shooter. The most important arrest that day, coming out of the Daltex building from which shots were fired. In fact, we can now name 3 men arrested as shooters. Ted Shackley was filmed as he was arrested coming out of the book depository. E. Howard Hunt was photographed after he was arrested behind the grassy knoll. These 3 men worked together as a team, high-ranking officers of the CIA. Really? Beyond a reasonable doubt. But why? Vietnam. Kennedy had made up his mind and he had given the orders, everybody out by the end of 1965. Now, with this document, we can prove that. General Taylor, the head of the military, says here that he took this language calling for complete withdrawal directly from the most important documents of the period. But you won't find that language in those documents. All the most official documents have been altered and this key language has been removed, and we can now prove it. Black and white. That's a breakthrough. A week after Kennedy gave this order, Oswald was sent to work at the book depository. Kennedy died, the documents were altered, the truth was hidden. But killing Kennedy, what's that supposed to accomplish? Now you have Johnson. In 1961, Johnson told Kennedy, "Aw, hey, nah, don't send any goddamn troops to Vietnam." When, in August of '64, the clowns came running in and told Johnson how these tiny boats had attacked an American destroyer in the Gulf of Tonkin, Johnson said, "Don't give me that unprovoked attack crap. I know you bastards started it. Didn't you?" He made them admit it. And then he threw them out of the room. We can prove it. Then he got right on the phone and told Senator Russell that the generals were a bunch of hysterical women. We have the tapes. So, how did they get Johnson to go along with his war? Well, you've seen this, the most famous murder footage of all time, and it's a fraud. The limo was stopped when the kill shot was fired. The Secret Service parked the goddamn car in front of the grassy knoll, waiting for the kill shot for 6 seconds. The 15 most reliable witnesses say so, all the cops, Senator Yarborough sitting right in front of Johnson, and Walter Cronkite.
3 shots rang out. The car stopped momentarily. Secret Servicemen unloaded their rifles and started into the crowd.
But you don't see the limousine stop in this movie. This film has been altered. The Secret Service was completely involved in Kennedy's murder, and the killers wanted Johnson to know it. They wanted him to hear the shots and see the blood to ensure his cooperation. So, that's a taste. This movie is a breakthrough. We can finally bust out of the rabbit hole of lies. Watch and see. JFK's limousine stopped in front of the grassy knoll and sat there for over 4 seconds until the fatal shot was fired. Senator Yarborough was in the third car in the motorcade, 30 feet behind Kennedy when he was shot, and he said publicly that the limousine stopped.
Everything slowed up. The car stopped. The motorcade did not take off till about the time the third shot was fired.
A period of at least 5, 6, 7.
About 5 seconds measured this way.
And he said so in his Warren Commission affidavit with undisguised fury at the Secret Service. The wife of Dallas Mayor Earl Cabell said so in her Warren Commission testimony. 5 motorcycle cops riding alongside the limousine have said so on tape.
After the first shot was fired, Secret Service cut the speed on us. We were just barely moving. I would have sworn that the car stopped. 3, 4 seconds, maybe 5, 6. So I'd have to say that car just all but stopped. I don't recall myself stopping. I must have some target to get off of his motorcycle and run between those 2 cars.
5 eyewitness news people have said so.
I was on the White House press bus. I've had nightmares about it. The explosion, the car almost coming to a stop, almost to a dead stop, and then accelerating at tremendous speed.
And all of a sudden, pop, pop, pop. The limousine almost stopped for a moment and then lurched forward under the underpass.
We have a phone call from Bob Clark in Dallas.
We heard the shots very clearly. The car that the president was traveling, this car, came to an immediate stop. The Secret Service follow car. Some of the agents piled out. Then almost immediately leaped back into the car, and the motorcade took off very rapidly.
Mrs. Kennedy screamed out, "Oh no!" The car stopped momentarily. The Secret Service men immediately began fanning out into the crowd.
We stationed ourselves just down from the school book depository building. What I couldn't really believe was the car had, after that first shot, had come practically to a stop.
2 of the closest eyewitnesses said so.
The car got right beside me where I was at, and it actually stopped momentarily. And I heard Jackie Kennedy say, "Oh, God, no, no." And I heard John Connally say, "They're going to shoot us all."
The president looked up, and just as he looked up, 2 shots rang out, and he grabbed his chest, and this real odd look came over his face, and he pitched forward. And there was just an instantaneous, sort of an instant's pause, and in the motorcade it momentarily halted, and 3 or 4 more shots rang out, and they sped away real quickly.
Any one of these witnesses might be mistaken. 2 of them might be mistaken. But all of them? All the best witnesses. But we see no stop or even slowing of the limousine in the so-called Zapruder film. How is that possible? The film was a thunderclap when it was first made public, destroying the official story that Oswald shot Kennedy from behind, obliterating it. It became the bedrock of evidence for Warren Commission critics like me, and it's a fraud. It's less like a breakthrough and more like the bottom dropping out. What the hell? In 1966, the killers handed us this proof that their own official story was a lie. Why? We need to take our time here, eh? Let's observe first that an unaltered version of the film would show the limousine stopping in front of the knoll and waiting for the kill shot. It would make clear that the Secret Service are not only implicated, they are thrown into the spotlight, center stage, as the stars of the show. Any one of 100 different gunmen might have been found to fire that shot from the knoll, but only the Secret Service could have made that shot possible by first changing the route to go down Elm Street and then stopping the limousine and waiting for the kill shot. So, when I saw this official fake Zapruder film, I didn't blame the Secret Service because their crime had been removed. Instead, I blamed Lyndon Johnson and Earl Warren for lying to me, telling me the now obvious lie that Kennedy was killed by a shot from behind. And now notice, too, that it would have been much easier for the monsters to have changed the movement of Kennedy's body, to make it look like the shot came from behind, than it was to remove the limo stop. I did this. I made this altered version of the Zapruder film, changing the movement of Kennedy's body. It took me, an amateur with a lousy copy working by myself, 10 measly hours to make this change. But removing the limo stop? How do you even do that? That was a masterpiece of film editing deception. So, if it's so much easier, why did they not change the movement of Kennedy's body? Go ahead and stop the movie until you've thought about it for 5 or 10 years. I see now, 50 years later, that I blamed Lyndon Johnson and Earl Warren for lying to me because I was supposed to blame them. That was the point of releasing this film in 1966, to make Johnson look guilty and get Nixon elected. No foolin'. So let me make a couple of quick and sloppy points about Johnson. First, if we had seen this film with the limo stop, we might have excused Johnson for lying to us. We'd have understood that Johnson knew that the same men who had murdered Kennedy would murder him if he didn't cooperate. Second, notice that Johnson and Warren gave us all these documents and much more, as you're about to see. Really, it's all there. Third, it means that as you watch this, your mind is being violently assaulted with a lie. Your society, all the people all around you, have been psychologically and intellectually raped by this weaponized lie. But you ain't seen nothing yet, because the implications of fundamental Secret Service involvement are mind-boggling. For example, why was this crazy, stupid public execution even necessary? When it comes to the issue of 9/11 truth, Alex Jones is a straw man and an easy, clownish target. You won't find John Oliver making fun of these guys, however. Stephen Jones and David Ray Griffin are two of the real leaders of the 9/11 truth movement. Griffin and Jones are world-class scholars, preeminent in their fields. Jones was a conservative Republican Mormon who voted for Bush, and a tenured physics professor with a world-class reputation in the development of XEDS, a process measuring the energy level of an electron in order to identify what kind of atom it came from. One of his physics students asked him about the collapse of Building 7, which was not hit by a plane and which collapsed on the afternoon of September 11th in a pattern precisely resembling a controlled demolition. Jones discovered that the official explanation was completely anti-scientific, and he began speaking out, based on simple physics, jet fuel can't melt steel beams sort of thing. But then he woke up one morning and remembered that his specialty was in XEDS. He obtained samples of dust from 9/11, and the first thing he discovered was microspheres of iron. Microspheres are only created by melting. The 9/11 dust was full of proof that the steel had been melted. But his prize was this slide, one side of which is a spectrographic analysis of one of these iron microspheres, and another is a spectrographic analysis of thermite, the steel-cutting explosive used for controlled demolitions around the world. The dust from the World Trade Center is full of proof that explosives were used. The dust is also full of pieces of unexploded thermite, the remains of the wrappers that contained the explosives. Professor Jones has hugely contributed to the science of 9/11 truth. David Ray Griffin is a tenured professor of philosophy and theology at the prestigious Claremont McKenna College. He's a very highly regarded professional scholar. His life's work involves examining arguments and evidence to see whether the evidence supports those arguments. He has devoted himself to examining the official statements and the evidence, and for the last 15 years he has been explaining in professional scholarly detail that the evidence does not support the conclusions in the official government statements, but in fact, the simple observable facts show that the 9/11 attacks had to have been carried out in close cooperation